Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our partnership with EDF and C40 for our Creating Your Climate Action Plan webinar. We're so excited that you have joined us at this noonday here on the East Coast or wherever you are for this very impactful and informative information. I'm Dr. Carlos Nichols. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief of Staff and Managing Director here at the African American Mayors Association. And we are so grateful for our partners at the Environmental Defense Fund who continue to provide our communities, our mayors, and our leaders with resources to help move their communities forward and provide spaces of thriving in an ever-changing world. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Tanya Calhoun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlos. I appreciate and love saying that every time I get a chance to say it. So thank you so much, Carlos. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy, how is it already mid-November, right? And so again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar that's entitled Planning for Progress, Starting a Climate Action Plan for Your City. And so we'll spend a little bit of time today understanding the benefits of creating a climate action plan, and then what are the beginning process for starting those plans, and then we'll highlight lessons learned from plans from other cities that are already implementing those climate action plans, and then we'll end our time today learning about where to find resources that can support you as you develop or enhance your climate action plans. And so again, I'm Dr. Tanya Calhoun. I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement at the Environmental Defense Fund. And I'm joined today with my co-worker, Michael Ionu, who is the Manager of Community Engagement at EDF, as well as our fantastic partners, Laura J. and Robert Stuka at C40 Cities. And so we're delighted to have them join us in this very important conversation as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Michael so he can get us started today.
Thank you, Dr. Calhoun. It's great to be here, everyone. Thank you to those who have joined. I do have to apologize. I am a late substitute for the incomparable Stacy Fujii, who is feeling a bit under the weather today. So if you did join just to see her, I apologize. We will give free refunds if necessary. So with that, I am happy to get us started talking about why we're having this conversation in the first place and why we think it's so important to discuss climate action planning and working towards creating a climate action plan. And of course, just this year alone has served as plenty of evidence in a long line of evidence for the need of climate action. It is no longer just a future goal, but a present obligation for many municipalities and countries and cities across the country. With areas typically considered insulated from the worst of climate change now bearing unexpected scars. Everywhere in the country is at risk of some climate or weather-related impacts, but what we've seen in the past year has gone even beyond what is expected or what is considered normal. Just in the past week, we have been talking about wildfires, not just in California, but raging right now in New York and New Jersey. This hurricane season has unfortunately been a prime example of the increasing speed and intensification of the storms we now face, hitting places like St. Petersburg and the Florida coastline, which saw some of the worst damage in over a century. We've also seen the damage extend to places far inland, like Asheville, North Carolina, typically not considered a risk for hurricanes. I live in Washington, D.C., and just this year alone, we've had both record hot summers with multiple heat waves, and we just finished a record-long drought and rainless streak in the past 2 weeks. So I could keep going. Unfortunately, that would probably take up most of the time we have here. And I think we all have stories we could speak to that relate to this experience. And while everyone is impacted by climate change, those impacts are not distributed equally. Those most at risk include our youngest and oldest community members, socially vulnerable groups such as minorities and those from lower income communities, folks with chronic medical conditions and disabilities, and outdoor and other blue-collar laborers and workers. Many of these demographic groups are already concentrated in places that are likely to be hit hardest by climate change, and many of these folks make up large portions of our AAMA communities. There's a clear and present risk to many of these people. And without proper planning to establish safeguards, they are most likely to continue to fall through the cracks. And when we talk about climate action plans, we believe that they can help address these environmental justice concerns and the other myriad issues that are impacting our communities. They can serve as signals to external partners, making it easier to match your priorities to technical assistance opportunities and other avenues of support. They can help align government resources, both internally within your own municipality and externally, including state and federal resources, to help mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. And above all, they can help future-proof our communities, serving as beacons towards self-sustaining success. It's not just about reacting to future disasters and crises and preparing for them, but working proactively towards more stable environments where we give people the best chance to thrive rather than survive. And I know I just said a lot of high-minded, nice-sounding language, but we can now start talking about what that actually looks like in practice. So in addition to climate and environmental benefits, planning for local climate action can lead to multiple co-benefits, including in areas like health, where improved air quality via reducing pollution and emissions from trucks, ports, and other types of industry can lead to improved outcomes in the reduction of diseases like asthma and cancer. Many of the strategies and goals that we are going to talk about that are often part of climate action plans often lead to opportunities for economic development. This work leads to rethinking transportation, construction, electrification, and with that often comes an influx of investment, jobs, and other training opportunities and benefits. Additionally, even without climate action plans established, many places and communities are already making the shift towards more renewable forms of energy, not just because it's the morally correct or the right thing to do, but because there are economic and financial incentives to do so. In the long term, it often leads to reduced energy costs. And within a climate action plan, a community can set standards and incentives towards accelerating that shift. And then lastly, for now, but of course not comprehensively, the chaos of climate-related change and emergencies can often lead to more crime and instability. Increased temperatures, power outages, and more often put people in positions where tensions run high and can open the door to increased risks towards safety and security. And while a climate action plan can't control every possibility or eventuality, working towards the goals within a plan can help mitigate the worst impacts and lead to safer environments overall. So with that brief intro, I will pass it back to Dr. Calhoun to talk more about the benefits via partnerships.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. As you begin to engage in conversations about creating a climate action plan, as Michael mentioned, it opens the doors to conversations with fellow municipalities with those same goals, right? And it provides opportunities for you to learn from one another, whether it's in small cohorts or just general engagement in total. And so it also, it acquires different types of resources from organizations like EDF and C40 cities and some of the other partners that we will introduce you to help you to reach those goals. And so, if you've been around EDF enough, you'll always hear us say, we fully understand that mayors, community leaders, civic organizations, and are the change makers for their cities. And so they're dedicated to building a safe and healthy future for generations. And so, EDF, we simply desire to empower local leaders with resources and support that's needed to enhance those climate action strategies through infrastructure, economic progress, environmental justice, and clean energy transition opportunities. And so that's a main reason why we created this local climate action team and website that gives access to those resources with fellow partners. Again, C40, Elemental Impact, where we've provided toolkits, and all too well, we have a mayor's toolkit, and we have access to technical assistance and then different tracker tools as well. And so, this planning, it allows you to be proactive, right? As you prepare for resiliency tactics for your very own community. Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so, when the AAMA conference was here in April, I had a chance to talk to many of our AAMA member mayors, right, as well as during our fireside chat. And so we talked about how, a climate action plan is often needed to gain access to Bill and IRA and general government funding. And so let's have a very small moment of reality. Some of those IRA funds may be leaving, in this changing administration, but cities still need a plan to access potential new federal and state funding that's soon to be available. And in some cases where a climate action plan may, not be a direct requirement, having this plan can provide standardized, reusable information, if you will, that makes application processes for funding easier, and it eliminates you to, start from scratch, right? And so when you think about deploying more clean energy into local communities to advance EJ, help residents with saving money, as Michael mentioned, and cut harmful pollution, opportunities like direct pay, it can make it easier for local governments to invest in clean energy. And it could potentially allow them to take on bigger projects, right, faster to demonstrate climate leadership. And so direct pay, it allows governments to treat the amount of certain credits as a payment against tax on their tax returns. As a result, receive direct payments for certain clean energy tax credits. And just one example, not mine, but just an example of what that might look like. Let's think about the city of Vroomville. They buy a large electric garbage truck for municipal waste collection, right? So through direct pay, the city can get 30% or $40,000, which is, whichever is lower, of the cost of the truck back by using commercial clean vehicle credit. And so we provided a resource that you'll see here on the slide that's called the Clean Energy Tax Navigator. And so that website is cleanenergytaxnavigator.org. And so once you get on that site, you can click on a project type, that is similar to yours, right? And then you can use an interactive form to learn about and receive assistance on electric pay tax credits, for your potential, your planned, or your completed project. Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so in summary, we know that the impacts of climate change are already being felt by many communities, as Michael mentioned. In response, some local governments are choosing to develop these plans, right, to both acknowledge those threats as well as propose strategies for reducing those impacts in their communities. A strategic plan for climate protection is an essential tool for guiding a community to take effective action in climate change mitigation. And as Michael also mentioned, these policies can lead to co-benefits, partnership support, as well as pathways to resources. Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so I'm going to go through this really quickly because our partners at C40 are going to give you some very, very valuable information and go into greater detail. So Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so when EPA thought about, a local climate action framework, they have emphasized, that writing the text for a climate action plan is only one part of the larger planning process, right? And so in order to maximize the success in implementing the plan, it's important to engage local government staff, elected officials, residents, businesses, and other community stakeholders, right? And so we all know that this engagement, it can ensure that the goals and initiatives that are identified are desirable and practical for those involved in implementing them. And so within this slide here, you might not be able to see it well here, but I know you'll get these slides. They have developed a step-by-step guide, if you will. And so it talks about, developing your greenhouse gas inventory. And so in this phase, it helps you to quantify greenhouse gas emissions, from local government operations or your community as a whole, to establish a baseline for inventory, right? And so another phase is reaching out to communicate. And so this will help you to communicate with and engage partners in the community before, during, and after project implementation. And then there's another goal where, or there's another phase, I should say, that set goals and select actions. And so this phase helps you to articulate the goals for your project or your program, so you can identify and analyze those goals. And then another phase, obtain resources. And so this phase helps you to identify and pursue resources that are needed to support your project or your program, including funding, what staff time looks like, what technical expertise and buy-in. And so another phase is to take action. So this phase helps you to design and implement, the actions that are selected. And so it provides information on 3 types of efforts, to promote green government operations, adopt a policy, and engage the community, and then also tracking and reporting. And so this phase helps you to develop, track, analyze, and report on performance indicators. And so this is just an example of what, when we say developing a climate action plan, this is an example of a framework for what that looks like. And so, Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so, here in this slide, this is not a checklist, but rather a continuum or a scale that leads to the creation of a climate action plan. Again, as mayors, you are very much aware of your office capacity, as well as your city's need for the existence of either one of these strategies to address climate change. It's quite okay if a city doesn't commit all the way towards a climate action plan, and because you can still see the benefits from other options. And so, again, some cities have sustainability plans that address environmental, economic, and social considerations, right? Some cities take it further to create the climate action plan that we're talking about today, to include greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, and details actions the state can take to meet those goals, right? And so these plans may include additional components like resiliency strategies, clean energy targets, and economic and social goals. And so again, the individual characteristics of each state's economy, the resources, the capacity, even the political structure provide different opportunities for addressing climate change, and to help understand which plan works best for your city or for your town. Michael, you can go to the next slide. And so we just want to give a really quick shout out to 2 AAMA member cities that are, leading the way in climate action. And so, Long Beach, they developed their very first climate action plan in August of 2022. And so their goal, was to be more sustainable, be a more resilient city in the face of climate change impacts like air pollution, as we've mentioned, extreme heat, drought, coastal storm surge, sea level rise. And so residents, business owners, students, and other community stakeholders were encouraged to get involved in providing input to help with this climate action plan. And it has been fantastic for the city of Long Beach. And so another example is Cleveland. When they thought about their climate action plan, they wanted to talk about more than climate. Their particular plan was meant to strengthen the economy, clean the environment, and improve health and wellness of Clevelanders, if you will. And so, their very first climate action plan launched in 2013. And since then, this city has seen progress towards their very own sustainability goals. Like, their carbon pollution has been reduced and water and air quality has improved, right? The city's been recognized for supporting solar and wind energy. They've got over 70 miles of bike infrastructure that's been installed. And so, dozens of organizations have implemented, the Cleveland Tree Plan, right? And so, Cleveland and Long Beach, again, they've really set the standard for what it looks like to successfully create a climate action plan and really take in what their residents, felt was important for them to be a sustainable city. Again, these are just 2 examples of AAMA member mayors that have created these plans. And so I just wanted to share that, give a shout out. And with that, I want to move on to Laura and Robert, because I know that they're going to give us some very, very pertinent information and supplement this fantastic conversation. So Laura and Robert, I would love for you 2 all to introduce yourselves and take as much time as you need, because I know, again, that you all have some fantastic information that can be shared. So thank you.
Well, thank you to Amma and Tanya so much for that introduction. We're so pleased to be here and joining you all for this really critical conversation. My name is Laura J. I serve as the Regional Director for North America at C40, so I oversee our work within the United States and Canada, and I'm coming to you from the great city of Chicago. I'll let Robert introduce himself, and then we'll kind of walk through some of our slides.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm head of climate action implementation for North America. So I support all of our cities in Canada and the US on technical aspects relating to implementing climate action. And so leveraging the global teams that C40 has in many climate action areas and connecting them to our cities to deliver support here in the region. I sit actually in Kelowna, British Columbia on the West Coast here.
Great. Michael, next slide. So for those of you who don't know us, we are a network of mayors from 100 kind of world leading cities working to deliver the urgent action that's needed right now to confront the climate crisis. Together, we're working to create a future where everyone everywhere can thrive. And so within the United States, we work with 14 member cities, as well as 3 in Canada within North America. But globally, again, we have 100 mayors and cities who we work with. And so I think if you go to the next slide, we have a map. Here you go. We represent about 600 million residents and really, but look at kind of influencing around 900 million people living and working within our wider metro areas. And I know that there's a lot of AAMA members that both cover some of these cities or in their metro region of some of these cities. And so much of our mandate and our mission at C40 is to work with our member cities to help inspire and create tools and resources that are to support cities and mayors of all sizes across countries around the world. So, I think when it comes to climate action planning, we've been working with our cities for a long time on climate action planning. We know what's worked, we know what hasn't, we have frameworks, we have tools, and that's why we've been invited here today to kind of share some of that expertise with you all. And what's been created that, really pulling from, again, some of this experience around the world. There's so much happening within the context of the United States right now that I think that, we all know that we need to dig deep and get the work done at home. And there's so much to be learning as well from our peers around the world who have been in similar situations, who are have been experiencing extreme heat or wildfires in ways we haven't. And really learn from all that. So as a network, that's part of what we're here for, is that global peer sharing, that global best practice learning, and then really to support mayors and cities within our countries and really contextualizing those resources and making them relevant to their local communities. Next slide, please. So at C40, we have kind of 2 broad missions that help drive all of our work. And this becomes an anchor for all the tools we develop and all the work that we do. The first one is really helping the world get off fossil fuels in order to halt climate breakdown. This is, I think undisputable evidence that fossil fuels are driving the climate crisis. And so we really work, very much on the reduction of emissions as part of that, and supporting mayors to kind of win the global arguments around renewables and stopping the use of fossil fuels. So there's a big kind of advocacy role we play at different levels of government through that. The second one, and this was touched on by Tanya and Michael and others, around addressing the impacts and injustices of the climate breakdown. Climate change is not fair. It does not impact everybody equally. And so a lot of our work is very much anchored in the creation of good green jobs that are supported by the actions that go into climate action planning. Unlocking funding and unlocking actions to create greater climate resilience in these communities. And this was touched on, as well as some of the work happening in Long Beach and Cleveland and others, to really strengthen resilience of communities, particularly frontline communities that we're seeing in cities of all sizes across the world, and really improving public health by making climate a health issue. The issue of air quality was touched on briefly before, and we're seeing this across the world. And there's so much to learn from our peer cities around the world on the issue of air quality and how intrinsically linked it is to climate action. And I think that we can look back to the history of the environmental justice community and really anchoring that in a lot of the work and really build on that from what we're able to kind of create and move forward on here within our cities in the United States. Next slide, please. So I think I'll touch on this slide, and then Robert, I'm going to pass to you. Yeah. Okay. I can't remember where we decided to hand over. So, for us, and this was touched on briefly already by Michael or maybe Tanya, of just the kind of why do this, right? This isn't just about doing the climate action plan. This is about economic growth. It's about health. It's about well-being within your communities. And a climate action plan is a tool in order to accelerate the advancement of these, right? So I think you can call it what you want, right? But the pillars of climate, economy, health, and well-being are all interrelated and deserve that kind of interrelated focus. And again, the tools and frameworks of climate action planning help get there. So we know within economic growth, climate action planning fuels the creation of jobs, the huge creation of jobs and building of a local economy. Within health actions within, that address climate change also improve indoor and outdoor air quality, whether that's through changing heating sources in your building to creating more electric vehicles, or purchasing electric buses that have a huge impact on the air quality of people who are riding the buses and the health impacts from that, to the protection of extreme weather and heat. And then last, kind of on the well-being side, that is so top of mind for so many of us right now in the United States, is the role of lowering energy bills, kind of changing the bottom line for the struggles that everyday people are having that are real, right? Of how much money that they have to spend within their pockets. So the ability to kind of anchor some of this work into that, into energy poverty, as well as lowering just daily cost of utilities, is huge. Enhancing public space and kind of the well-being around that, improving walkability, community access, which creates more walkability, more access to jobs within various communities, improve safety, as Michael touched on. That all of that really kind of becomes encompassed in the things that one might put within a climate action plan. All right, I'm going to pass over to Robert to talk a little bit about our framework and how it can be helpful to all of you.
Thanks. And I just want to comment on the last slide that the challenges that Laura identified that you're all feeling in your cities, they are persistent, and they've been building over decades and decades, right? And so the only way out really is to do things differently and acknowledge the sources of some of these challenges, of which how we've built out our cities and societies, are directly impacting the outcomes that we're seeing. The climate change transition framework is an update to our climate action planning guidance we've been providing to our cities. So many of our cities already have plans in place to align with the Paris Accord as part of C40 membership. And as we're entering kind of a new phase of climate action, looking to 2025 and beyond, we've developed an updated framework to be responsive to where cities are at. And also recognizing that over the last 4 years, companies, governments have been providing plans or targets to align with the Paris Agreement, which implies we're striving toward 1.5 degrees, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, and toward a scenario where we're going to be at net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And the United Nations recognize that the integrity of these commitments is super critical. It's not just that we say we're going to do this, we have to have credible plans to be able to do this. And so this framework is in response to the United Nations in wanting more credibility behind these net zero commitments and what they are, and how do we ensure we have the right processes and actions coming out of cities to be able to actually achieve this. And so the framework has been directly created in response to that and adapted to city climate action planning. So this is not for corporations, right? This is strictly done for cities that we are now applying to. We have 10 cities in North America right now who are updating their plans, who will be using this framework. So next slide, please. And so I'm just going to walk you through the 6 components of this. And it starts with the commitment by mayors and by governments around the targets, right? Having a commitment to get to having emissions by 2030 and by 2050, having a net zero commitment. That city leadership really being critical so that stakeholders within your city, the community members, state governments really understand that you are committed and are able to work with you alongside to be able to be successful in their own commitments. As well, the climate commitments are embedded into your city governance structures. So in terms of cities are big, complex entities. They have many departments, they do many things. But it's important that climate action is just not relegated to a silo or a team of 3 within your city. It's really looking at, what are the various things that cities do that influence greenhouse gas emissions and livability and sustainability within your city. And so that includes integrating with decisions around land use planning, around transportation, around waste, around buildings, and really finding ways to be able to integrate that. And a core part of this, what we call mainstreaming, is around capital planning, climate budgeting, thinking about annually, what is it that you're committing to, how you're building your city, how you're planning services, and how is that helping bend the curve either in the positive way in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving resilience, or maybe in the other direction, what it may be doing in terms of increasing emissions and maybe reducing resilience. So the mainstreaming is really just a critical piece to that commitment to back it up, to make sure that we're not just doing some things and then on the other side of it we're going in the other direction. We all want to be pulling in that positive direction toward our targets. The second component is around inclusive engagement and communication. So it's important that we start to engage diversity of stakeholders and communities and businesses, really with the idea of how do we create community-wide action. This is not something that's just the city's responsibility to be taking climate action, but the city is an important convener, has important powers, and really the city leadership is relied upon by everyone in the community to be able to take the scaled collective action that is needed. And so that, that piece is really about how do we create collaboration and partnerships and places for learning to be able to get everybody to work together. C40 does a lot of city business engagement in different sector areas to help move the needle, and those things are critical components to be able to help with that type of mobilization, as well as ensuring that there's the climate actions that are being developed and proposed are done in an equitable manner, that we're talking to those communities that are going to be impacted and find a way to allow them both to be part of the solution as well as a benefit from those solutions. The next piece is around evidence to inform goals and targets. So that's, greenhouse gas inventories certainly help you understand kind of where the biggest points of greenhouse gas emissions to help you kind of decide where to start, where to go, understanding the sources of emissions from your own city infrastructure and buildings, but as well, what analysis is done around vulnerability and adaptation to be able to inform your plans is really critical. So really understanding kind of what do you need to focus on, what dials could you turn, and what's going to have the greatest impact to be able to focus on. The next piece with this is around supporting then that evidence with goals and strategies that are appropriate. And I think where the evolution of climate action is going is looking not only at kind of the direct emissions, so the emissions from heating homes, driving cars, etc. But we're looking kind of a lot of these sources are generated outside of the city footprint. So it speaks to how city climate action can have a disproportionate impact on society, right? If we're going to be drilling a lot more oil in America, for example, that's the supply side of the equation, but the city actually has a huge impact on the demand side of that equation for demand for fossil fuels. And the demand of fossil fuels has a great impact on the upstream emissions that come from the production of fossil fuels. And similarly, we look at the upstream production, say, of food production, which can be quite high as well if we look at that. Or if we look at the materials that go into building our buildings, so if we look at steel and concrete, how can we influence those sectors to be able to reduce the emissions of those? So we kind of look at a very holistic way around, what is being consumed and produced both within and outside of the city, and what are some of the alternatives to help reduce the emissions of those. So really comprehensive sectoral-wide strategies, as we say, and looking at the city powers, both that may be direct, your regulatory powers, for example, but as well as indirect powers to be able to influence things like utility dockets as it relates to the affordability and the electricity and gas systems that fuel your city as it relates to businesses and things like that. So really kind of thinking about what is possible and like I mentioned, looking at both influence as well as direct control. Evidence-based actions and implementation planning. So when we talk about implementation, I think it's important to be looking at, both adaptation and mitigation actions together. And so there's co-benefits sometimes that can be done. It's important to be able to really understand beyond climate action, especially when communicating out to the public, what are some of the benefits to action. I mean, we've highlighted on the economic, the health, the mobility solutions, certainly that can come forth. So really making sure that we are implementing and we are really able to holistically understand what the implications of these are. Implementation, a huge part is procurement, city procurement in both how things get procured and what gets procured can really shape the city's ability to create those good green jobs that we want out of this locally. And kind of the last piece on that evidence actions implementation planning really is really, as we're looking at that really hard target, at the end of the day, that end use and support of fossil fuels really needs to be kind of in upfront and front, and looking at all the different sources of how we are using fossil fuels and what are the different alternatives that are in play and what does that roadmap look like. And then a big part of this actually is prioritizing short-term and long-term actions. So the issue with many of these targets, the 2050 targets, is very long-term. But we need to be looking at, the next 5 years, 10-year plans, and in these kind of shorter-term increments, both to be accountable, but really understand that, every day we are purchasing equipment that, will last for another 15, 25, 30 years. We're building buildings that will be around for 50, 100 years. And so if we delay taking action now, we're really missing that cycle, that opportunity, or we may be paying way more than we need to be replacing early to be able to get to where we need to go. So I think it's really being strategic, informed by evidence, with our actions. And lastly, having a robust way to kind of monitor your progress and evaluate what you're doing is just really critical. That, we're not going to get it all right, but we need to be able to implement actions, evaluate how they're going, and then be able to continue to build upon those and be able to communicate out to the public, because they all want to know what's happening. And not just, communicating on the climate front, but I think on the equity front, on the affordability front, all these top line issues, to be able to continue to move on. Move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you kind of 3 key points to kind of get, how set you in the right pathway on the climate action and implementing the framework. But first thing is really assessing kind of what is the city doing right now, right? What things are moving in the right direction, what things are moving kind of away from that direction, and definitely looking at what are other cities doing and where are they seeing successes. And that's kind of what C40 does a lot, is we're here for cities to share knowledge, share successes, share challenges among each other, and to really understand what they can do. And this includes now, particularly, I think, looking at, the state context that you're within, and what is the state mandates around climate action, and how can, you work together to be able to go further. I like this kind of comment here: what gaps exist to prevent progress toward climate goals? And this framing is just so critical. We say we have to take climate action, right? But I think one of the key parts of the city as well is removing the barriers that prevent us and citizens and businesses from taking climate action. And I think there's a lot of barriers when we think about people's transportation challenges, or the challenges with inefficient buildings that they're dealing with, or lack of availability to electric vehicles or transit. So I think there's a lot of barriers that we need to remove. And so thinking of the framing of how can we remove what's preventing us from taking climate action is as equally important as what actions do we need to take. Next slide, please. This slide here is just understanding your powers and influence. I know we touched on that, but I think it's really important that we don't just kind of look at, within just, city operations, city buildings. Our regulatory toolbox varies from city to city. So just recognizing that nuance, we've kind of broken it down into, 5 key pieces. Of course, top line is really, what do you own and what do you have powers to procure about? And of course, that is your direct authority. But then the other aspects of it is really the power to regulate land use, regulate air quality, for example. And then the next, going down the level, is really what tables do you sit at to have indirect authority and advocacy pieces. And certainly we see that, around business, different business groups that you sit at. It's the city being able to engage in regulatory dockets and proceedings. It is your lobbying with state authorities, for example, or federally, or to different departments, where you do have a voice and where leadership can really have a big impact on steering where things go. Incentives, of course, and partnerships are kind of the softer way of doing things. It's kind of that positive approach, and they are really important to be able to make sure people are not standing out in front on their own. You're basically providing a place for people to get together and partner and really build momentum. And I think it's really important when you're talking about community organizations who are really trying to do good work in your community. Being able to support those organizations to do more, I think, is really critical. And then as well, political and social influence. So we talk about things like social marketing, can be really important. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a change when we are trying to get to a low carbon future. And so it is naturally different from where we are today. We are talking about a social and cultural shifts, and how does messaging kind of shape that? And how do we create that positive vision of what is possible? And I think that's really important. And so that also leads to kind of that mayoral leadership, that mayoral commitment being really important in influencing that. Next slide. And that speaks to that last bit, right? So really examining kind of what the city can do, what are the city's actions, what are the city's powers, and then really building those strong local and regional coalitions and kind of being there. Where are there gaps in terms of a sector needing to have some technical, if we're trying to implement higher building standards, for example, that sector does need help in terms of workforce training, in terms of understanding what's possible. If there is going to be a process around enforcing regulations, you're making that as easy as possible, is really important for success, and really being aware of, who might fall through the cracks in these, if policies or actions are in place, and creating strategies and plans to protect those, so that does not happen. So I think there's a lot there, and providing data support. Of course, cities do have a lot of data around their city, and especially around utility data, for example. And so being able to offer up some of that data for people to be able to use, to be able to help support actions, can really create a catalyst to mobilize that community-wide action that I think is the role of cities, that is so powerful. Next slide. So we have a lot of resources at C40 to give you kind of these concrete examples of where to go from here, and certainly share with the staff. The first one obviously is the framework itself. We'll throw the links within the chat for each of these, but it is the climate change transition framework, which kind of has the breakdown of the 8 steps or 6 steps I've just articulated. We have C40 accelerators. So any city can look at our C40 accelerators. These are sector-wide kind of actions that we've identified represent high levels of climate action. So we have accelerators around safe water, around green and healthy streets, around zero waste, around urban nature, around net zero buildings, around clean construction. So you can see kind of on the graphic there, many aspects of climate action. We've created these, what we used to be called declarations, but really are a set of ambitious actions that cities can take and pop into their climate action plans, and really have a political commitment around and work toward. And so by signing on to these, we do provide cities with the specific support and resources to be able to achieve these targets and those actions. And lastly, we have a C40 Knowledge Hub, which really is our kind of warehouse of all resources that we create through our work. So it would have implementation guides in different aspects of climate action. It has policy explorers of, it's a map of the world and kind of seeing, what is Rotterdam doing? What is New York doing? What is Seoul doing on waste, on buildings, etc. So really kind of practical places to just go to and see kind of like who's doing what where and how are they doing it. And lastly, articles and case studies as well in some of these areas. So we continue to build out our knowledge base, knowledge hub, but it really is a go-to resource as if you're looking at any type of climate action to kind of see kind of what's out there, what's the state of things, and just really valuable. And these are, again, you don't need it to be a C40 member to access most of these resources. Next slide. So yeah, that's it for me. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate that. Really fantastic information. And so, as we begin to come to a close to this initial conversation about climate action planning, because we know that these conversations are going to continue, we want to just talk about some next steps. And Robert really already hit on it, assess where you are in the process, whether it's, you feel ready for climate action planning, or, you're thinking about the smaller wins for your city. We know that this process requires time, staff dedicated to this, but just assessing where you are is a move in the right direction. And then, we will provide a climate action plan starter kit, if you will, and it's really resources that help you to move towards climate action planning, resources that will include information that Robert and Laura shared as well. And so also, reach out to us at EDF, this community engagement team. We are here to have conversations with you. You know where to find us. And so we also want you to reach out to other trusted partners. We talked about these partnering, and So EDF is going to absolutely make sure you have access to, again, the information that Robert and Laura shared with C40 Cities, some other organizations that we began to have conversations with to provide technical assistance for creating climate action plans. And then your fellow mayors, make sure you're reaching out to them to have conversations about where they are, where they got stuck in the process. You know, maybe you start this together, maybe you join a cohort. And so having said that, stay tuned for more training opportunities. Stay tuned for opportunities where we will be creating cohorts so that you can get that start, right, in moving towards the right direction for creating your climate action plan. And so I see some things in the chat. I don't know if you all have used the chat as a way to maybe ask some questions away that I think I saw Mayor Danya put a question in there. But if you do have some quick questions that you want to ask, but we also, again, this next slide, Michael, please reach out to us if you have more questions. If you think about something after we've ended this time today, like, oh my goodness, Tanya said, or Laura mentioned, or Robert mentioned, Michael said, and if you think about this after our time today, this is how you reach us for those questions. And so I just really want to say thank you for, joining us today. I don't know if Derek had a question. If you have a question, I don't know if you can be unmuted, but if you can put it in chat, I think you'll be able to do that and we'll see it. I will let Dr. Carlos let us know whether or not that's possible to come off mute or if you need to put it in the chat. But reach out to us, like I said. And so, again, I just want to really thank you for being here today. Again, I know that these are just the beginning conversations about climate action planning, and we know that you all are going to reach out to all of us with your questions to help you move forward in this. And so I just want to say thank you. I don't know if Michael or Robert or Laura have any closing remarks, but I want to make sure I give the floor to you. I see no.
No, just thank you so much for having us. We're available for any
Absolutely.
follow-up questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura and Robert. We really, really, really appreciate your time today. And we know that this is, for us as well, this is not going to be our last conversation with you all because you all are just so knowledgeable, just well of knowledge. And we appreciate that. So Dr. Carlos, I will turn it back over to you if you want to close us out or if you see any hands raised. But just know that we are here to continue this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you again so much, Michael, Dr. Tanya, Laura, and Robert, for this amazing, amazing session. If there are any questions, you can raise your hand. If not, you see their contact information there along with Stacy Fujii, who is our EDF fellow. Feel free to reach out. We will send out to all the participants here, we will send out through your calendar invites or through your sign-ins, your registration, just some follow-up also with all of this contact information. Feel free, they are accessible. And we are so grateful for our new friends over at C40 who joined in this conversation. And if there's nothing else, I think we will return the rest of everyone's afternoon or late morning to them. And we look forward to seeing all of you again at our next webinar session. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.